Thank you, everyone, and welcome back for our International Space Leaders panel. It comes on very, very nicely, I suppose, but absolutely imperatively from what General Whiting was talking about in his keynote. Because the main focus, we're clear what the strategic challenges are, what the capabilities that we need to be developing together are. And so the focus of this panel is looking at the challenges in the space domain. How can we work together internationally with our like-minded allies to maximally and proactively secure against the potential threat landscape that has been outlined to us? And I'm delighted to welcome the panelists on stage. If they would like to come up, please, and then I'll do the formal introductions. Could we give our colleagues a very warm welcome, please? So chairing this panel, which is an extended panel, which will go on until midday, delighted to welcome Juliana Suess, who is Research Fellow in Space Security at the Royal United Services Institute. We have Colonel Frédéric Guénette, who is Deputy Commander of the 3rd Canadian Space Division. Major General Gregory Novak, who is Commander of Australia Space Command. General Louis Saez, who is Director of the Chilean Space Directorate. Major General Paul Tedman, Commander UK Space Command. Major General Michael Traut, Commander German Space Command. And of course, General Stephen Whiting, Commander United States Space Command. Colleagues, thank you very much for giving us the time to share your perspectives with us as colleagues. Juliana, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the introduction. I think I'm the only person on this panel who needed an introduction. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to these gentlemen today. I've been asked to give a quick scene setter to discuss what we're going to be talking about today. I think the two main themes are space threats that we face today, but then also what are we going to do about it? And specifically, how can we collaborate to face these threats together? I don't think I need to tell this group of people that space threats are neither new nor emerging. I think quite often these things are grouped together. We talk about space threats as an emerging thing we need to worry about. I think anyone who says that has clearly, missed their history lesson, because space threats have been a reality since 1959, and very briefly after we launched the first satellite ever. So if that is new, then I think we have some things to worry about. I do think we do need to worry about the increasing sort of integration of space and other threats. I think, for example, specifically the intersection with cyber is something that's very often neglected. And I think that is a message that specifically also does need to be heard by the commercial sector, because the more that militaries rely on the commercial sector, the more the commercial sector will also be targeted. And I think obviously the Viasat attack on the morning of the 22nd of February showed that quite clearly. I think the trend in terms of what space threats we've actually seen in the last couple of years has certainly been, towards the temporary and reversible end of things. We've certainly seen electronic warfare capabilities being used against space assets, but also the aforementioned cyber threat. And I think that simply is a reflection of how we use space now, right? We're not talking about bespoke individual military satellites anymore. We're talking about a mass of smaller satellites operating in low Earth orbit. We're talking about massive constellations. And a simple, kinetic attack against any one of these would not really, wouldn't be efficient. It probably wouldn't be very useful. You'd more likely damage your own space assets as a result. But I do think we increasingly see competitors and adversaries carrying out RPOs in higher orbits, which obviously are a potential danger to our more bespoke assets, military assets specifically. So I do think that is a trend to be watching. We definitely see sort of different approaches in terms of threats when we look at the different orbits. So I think there is a nuance that we must bear in mind as well. I don't think the danger of kinetic threats is something that we can completely put aside and stop worrying about. I think another trend that we've seen that I think has been very interesting to watch is the increasing transparency in space. It's become much, much harder to hide what you're doing in space, right? You've got hobby astronomers and you've got commercial companies, and they're now able to tell us exactly what certain space assets are doing, what they're not doing. And specifically, if countries are not cataloguing items accordingly, we can now see those things and keep track of them. Lastly, the point on cooperation. I do think that Ukraine has shown us that red band can be cut when it needs to be, that there can be quick collaboration when there needs to be, and that bureaucracy can be at least stuffed to the side a little bit. But I do think there's now a question of how can we make this emergency routine, in the sense of how do we make these emergency procedures that we set up, how can we actually learn something for the day-to-day life, and how can we actually make sure that we collaborate on a day-to-day basis. And with that, all very easy questions, as you can see. I want to quiz our panel on the rest of the questions. I've asked them specifically to sort of sketch out space threats, not just today, but also in the next 10 to 20 years, because obviously we do need to think about hardening and making our satellites resilient to threats in 20, 30 years, because that's when they'll still be operating. So I'm going to be starting with you, General Whiting, if you don't mind. If you could sketch out space threats that we face today and how they might change in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, thank you, Juliana. It's great to be here with all of my colleagues on the panel. Thank you for moderating. You know, I'm humble trying to project 10 to 20 years in the future. That's a very difficult thing to do. If we go back 20 years from today, it was 2004. Who would have imagined all of our nations would have these organizations that we have the privileges to lead, and that we would be where we are with regard to space, soon to go back to the moon. But a lot has changed in 20 years, so a lot can change. The threats that I talked about in my remarks, from the non-kinetic jamming up to the co-orbital ASATs and everything in between, I think we're going to continue to see those proliferate, democratize. But I would point to maybe two areas that maybe three that cause me most concern. One is cyber, as you noted, Juliana. I like to refer to cyber as the soft underbelly of the space enterprise. Not only are these global networks in space, but they also reach out to 22,000 miles above the Earth's surface to geosynchronous orbit, and soon they will go to cislunar. And that creates a lot of novel cyber attack surface. And strategic competitors would rather try to deny us our space capabilities in cyber than to do it in the domain. They've proven they can do it in the domain, but it's cheaper for them and harder for us to attribute if they use cyber. So cyber is a key threat vector that we have to really harden ourselves against. Secondly, I would highlight just the growing role of directed energy. Many of these space threats and our counters to them are very expensive. Directed energy, as that technology continues to mature and perfect, really gives you the opportunity to think about a 1V mini type capability. And so whether that's high energy lasers, high power microwaves, I think we're going to see an ongoing expansion of the directed energy threats. And then lastly, I would note that yes, everything in space is in motion, but there are very defined bands in which we operate. In fact, in many ways, LEO, MEO, GEO, those are all distinct geographic regions, and really nothing can go bridge between them. I think in the next 20 years, we're going to see capabilities that allow for sustained space maneuver, which is going to change the threats we see as things can move through all those orbital regimes, but also potentially change our responses and our ability to deliver capabilities back to the joint force in our nations.
Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Major General Traut for the next.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, thanks very much for having a German on this panel in London, which is hopefully usual to us right now. Well, on threats, on military threats, we have expanded a lot already, and General Whiting was setting out some technological trends where threats could emerge, physical threats, and of course the cyber threats. What I would like to add from that perspective is that space, of course, and we have discussed that quite a lot during the last couple of days, is getting more and more dynamic and more agile, more kinetic. More objects going to be in space. It's going to be, due to the technological development, it's going to be easier and easier for many actors to get into space. And this broadens, of course, the threat spectrum and the potential of conflict. But there's another perspective which I was thinking about when exploring the question, Juliana's question. Perhaps we don't only face threats from the outside, but from the inside as well. So there are two aspects to that. First of all, when we talk about space, we tend to talk about the space segments only, about the satellites. So still, everything which is happening in space is dependent on a very complex structure, a terrestrial structure as well. So all of you know that we need to have links, we need to have communication, we need to have ground stations, and more of that, of course, we need to have in a second line the ability to access space, which is a complex technological endeavor as well. And we want to make sure that there are no Russian or Chinese parts in our rockets and our systems supporting that. And of course, we need to be aware on space. We need to be able to lead and to command and control space. And I think the most important space segment of a space systems are all of us, because the users of space-based services. First of all, if we are not conscious about the importance of space, well, we don't need to tell this community, this audience about the importance, but we need to tell the rest of our societies. There's still a lack of consciousness, which I start to perceive as a threat to our ambitions and to our ideas. And the second problem I see, besides that all those systems are complex and fragile, and not only our systems, adversary systems as well. So it's worthwhile to analyze adversary space systems as thoroughly as we do analyze our systems and identify the strengths and weaknesses, and of course the opportunities. Our problem is perhaps as well that we are, this was mentioned as well a couple of times today and yesterday, we are pretty much too slow. So we tend to over-organize. We do have some problems to work together. And we need to keep up the speed. This was mentioned this morning as well. And so we need to be aware on those risks, or I would call them really threats to our endeavors, not only from the outside, but from the inside. That's, I think, sufficient for this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm handing over to General Saez for the...
Probably, thank you so much for Traut to be here and have the chance to provide probably a different vision about the space development. Because, as was discussed in this panel, and in the conference, we're facing similar challenges. But also we have very local conditions that allow or not to be able to use the space as a resort to increase the quality of life and the security of our people. So in South America, in particular, to have the chance to be an international organization that provide information and support the international security, probably we need to face this in a very systemic approach. So we need to think in the national and regional space system to each country and the region. So we need to really set the attention in the foundation of the process. So for that reason, the governance is an issue today. As different in Europe, we don't have many countries that have a space agency, for instance. So set the attention into improve the national and regional governance is probably one of the primary objectives. For instance, today there are initiatives for the creation of the Latin American Space Agency. It's an ongoing process and probably will take a time. But also talent promotion, because the language today become to be a very important barrier that doesn't allow to us as a continent to be part of the international space industry. So promote the talent in Spanish in order to get the qualification and the certification of our people to be part and to boost the international industry. Probably today is the second main challenge that we are facing. And also the knowledge creation, because one of the strategic difference of the space domain is we need to be the owner of the technology and the knowledge. there are no chance to go to the market and buy the capacities today. It's so related also with the transfer of technology. So knowledge creation is another of the baseline to be an international player. And finally, the possibility to boost the national industry and the regional industry in a very collaborative approach, because develop technology and be the owner of that technology will be at the end the best way how we could provide good information, reliable information, and capacity to support the international security. So the industrial approach is probably another of the challenges that we're challenger in South America. And the space domain awareness we consider could be the path, the way. So we are in a place when everyone needs information today. Everyone wants to know who are and what are they doing in the space. So we are in the perfect position. For instance, in Chile, we have about the 17 of the international asset related with astronomy. More of 1,000 telescopes is able to be used. And now we are connected to Australia with fiber optic and Antarctic. So the possibility to collect very reliable data and update data and provide good information from the international catalog probably will be the best way how our continent could be an international player.
Thank you very much. And as you've already mentioned, Australia, I'll hand over to Major General Lozisk.
Thanks, Juliana. And I think the real challenge now is after General Whiting's address and those three responses, how do you add to this question something new? So let me try. And I might do that if I can by offering starting off with a particularly Australian perspective. We had our defence strategic review, a very similar process to what the UK has just commenced undertaking. The report from that landed in April of 23, and 12 months later, our National Defence Strategy landed in April of this year. And that is the capstone reference, I guess, with which our defence organisation, our integrated force, looks to analysis and assessment of threat. And I think the key takeaways I would offer in this forum, as I look at what has driven my considerations of threat, is in the National Defence Strategy for Australia, we recognise that state competition is back, if it ever went away, but it's back and on the rise. Regional and global military build-ups, and this is across all domains, and while they are not necessarily new, they are perhaps happening with a degree of less transparency than perhaps we've seen in recent years. And together those things, along with a bunch of other geostrategic drivers, we think there's less warning time available to us for escalation to crisis and conflict. So what does that mean from a space domain? I think it validates many of the points that have been raised here this morning and some of the conversations yesterday. And I would summarise those as a space commander and say, I accept very much that the domain in which I need to operate and the forces I need to generate to operate in that domain, increasingly congested. The increase in technology, the reliability of systems that allow a space presence, the decreasing costs, more entities, state and commercial, will be operating in space, and that trend is going to continue in that time frame. We're looking at 10 to 20 years. That congested part, also contested. We know that space effects, space capabilities, space naval operations, they're a source of massive advantage for us, not just militarily, but for all other aspects of national security, national endeavour. So what we will find is commercial, but also states, there will be periods of time increasingly where everyone is seeking advantage, and at times interests won't align, so those advantages will be a point of contest. So that congested, contested, and I think as well you'd layer that on top of the environmental threats from space, of weather, debris, and other environmental effects. Now they are extant as well. So we find ourselves in this tough and challenging domain at the best of times, getting harder to operate in. And my mission in Australia is a force generation mission. I prepare, raise, train and sustain space forces for force assignment and then employment under our operational headquarters. So my mission is really about assurance. It's about force generation and assuring those capabilities are ready at the time they're required to do the effect that Australia and our integrated force requires of them. And I think that's how I would get to my hopefully insightful comment on how am I adding to this conversation. The threat I look at is it's that interplay between what is an increasingly challenging environment to assure and operate capabilities at the same time as we have national endeavours and integrated military force that is increasingly reliant and dependent on space-enabled effects to do what it needs to do. So that's the key threat. The other one I would just layer off the top of my head on top of that is, and Mike just touched on it, it's the pace with which things are changing as well. We talked about reduced strategic warning time. We spoke about the acquisition processes and that which we are used to with our major capital projects. The pace with which we need to deliver new capabilities, not just to keep pace with threats, but also to remain relevant to our allies and partners in terms of collaborative efforts. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. Keeping the UK-Australia space bridge intact, Major General Tedman.
Thanks, Juliana. Same. How do you add? I think it's first of all worth just understanding what is threat. I mean, from a UK perspective, that would be an adversary with a capability and the will to use it. So that's really important. And therefore, from what we've heard over the last day plus, we know that those threats are increasing and diversifying. So that's obviously a serious challenge to us as we go forward. And it's easy for me as a simple soldier to look at those threats through the lens of the joint force, but it's a national strategic risk and therefore threat. And so it's a cross-government endeavour that these threats are manifesting as. So we should just be conscious of that. And I absolutely agree with the across the ground, link and space segment. All of those areas are becoming increasingly vulnerable as we go forward. So what for us as we go forward as space commanders? Well, certainly from a UK perspective, our architectures were probably conceived when those threats weren't as real as they are now and therefore are increasingly more vulnerable. And so how do you deal with that? Well, clearly resilience is a large part to play in that, and we can all talk to that. We were aware of the need for resilience to offset and mitigate some of these threats. But I would argue that resilience on its own is not enough, and we're going to need to develop space control capabilities, as General Whiting mentioned earlier, so that we can control the domain at a time and place of our choosing. Because modern-day operations rely so much on space, and if you can't control the domain, then the entire joint force is held at risk for its subsequent operations. So I think as I go forward into a strategic defence review, the need for enhanced resilience, but also the need to be able to deliver control of the domain at a time and place of our choosing is becoming increasingly important.
Thank you very much. And thank you also for reminding us of the joint nature of space. And obviously we do see a diversity of uniforms on stage as well.
Need more Navy, right?
Last but certainly not least, Colonel Guénette.
First off, thank you, General Tedman, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be in London. So far, the conference has been very informative. It's comforting in a way to see how we have the same challenges and the same concerns, but it's also concerning that we have the same challenges and the same concerns. It makes me wonder, like, are we missing a gap? Is there unknowns that we are collectively not seeing right now? So on the topic of threats, as General Whiting mentioned, it's quite ambitious to try to look out 10, 15 years out. However, I think there's problems that we can start looking at. I propose 4 of them. The first one is mass. How are we going to solve the problem of mass? I know it's been talked a lot, but historically, Western nations, we've had the kind of an offset strategy, right, to address asymmetry. The first one, right, nuclear deterrence. Second one, PGM, stealth, and GPS. And the third one, which we're currently in, AI, cyber. We're leveraging that, but we're arguably losing that very quickly. So if we're unable to solve that problem, or at least maintain our advantage, we ought to look at another solution. The other bit was mentioned also, hazards, debris in space. This is going to create a substantial issue as the years go on, specifically how are we going to attribute, and there could be quite the space there for deception that we might not be able to handle the way that we want it to handle it. So that's another aspect I think we need to look at. Losing information dominance. Historically, we've been seeking actionable intelligence based on hard information. With the advent of AI and quantum, that's going to speed up tremendously that cycle. And if we're unable to keep pace, and more importantly, share at the speed of operational relevance, we're going to be left behind. And finally, and not to extract one more lesson out of Ukraine, but I wonder if with the proliferation of the commercial space, as more and more capability will be made available more and more affordably, is that a word? Similar to what we've seen with drone use in Ukraine, where they've been able to get off-the-shelf capabilities very quick and use it to decisive effect on the battlefield. I'm curious that is that a risk that we're going to incur in the space domain? So I think that's something that our policy and legal team should most definitely start to preemptively look at solution and making sure that those conditions don't develop.
Thank you very much. You can tell this is a military panel because we are literally right on the minute for about halfway through. So well done, making my job a lot easier. Having identified the threats, I guess we now have the more difficult question of what are we going to do about them? And, as Colonel Guénette has already said, we do have the same concerns, and should we be worried about that? So how can international collaboration tackle the threats we've just mentioned? And I'm going to start with you, Major General Novak.
Again, there'll be some commonality in my response to what we've been talking about, because we're all sharing the problem. We're approaching from like-minded ways. But I think one of the biggest things we can leverage out of collaboration is resilience, and we've spoken about it. We spoke about it a lot at the UK Gas, for those of you a few months ago. It's increasingly important for assuring our space capabilities so we don't have these single points of failure. And I think one of the ways we can leverage our collaborative approach to space operations is by understanding what that gives us in terms of potential for increasing our resilience. We can identify where one partner might have a strength, another has a shortfall, and we can look to approach that in a combined way. Likewise, we can just disperse our capabilities across different, if it's ground segment, different geographic locations. We can disperse across different orbits, different frequencies, different waveforms, different constellations, and the rest of it. So working together is a really strong basis for resilience in our space architecture. I'd expand that a little further as well, especially in this audience. It's not just resilience between international partners, but also with our commercial partners, with academia and our policy counterparts. And I think with other government agencies, we look internally as well when we start looking at things from a national significance of space. So I think collaboration offers us opportunity that we can leverage for resilience. That's the first thing I think I'd put on the table. The second one is we talk about deterrence, and we talk about the need to avoid escalation and conflict in space because of the potentially catastrophic and long-lasting effects of doing that. So one of the ways we set conditions for that is by continuing to do everything we can to encourage, inculcate, enforce responsible behaviours in space, rules and norms, space law. Again, working together with like-minded partners, we will achieve so much more in that endeavour than we will possibly achieve on our own or unilaterally. So I think there's another piece there of collaboration where we have advantage over our strategic competitors because we have something they don't. I'd offer the final point in terms of collaboration, and I feel quite strongly about this because we are a nascent space command in Australia. We've only been around 2.5 years, reasonably small, and while we have capabilities to contribute to combined operations and our own sovereign operation, they are mostly collaborative with our industry partners back in Australia or with international partners. But one thing we can bring, and I'm very proud of our contributions, are we bring a trusted and talented workforce. We provide some really smart people in our domestic space industry sector. So there's a technology sharing piece there as well. And then when we start to look at, all right, we've got smart and talented people working with technology that we're transferring. When we find something that's working for us and giving us a potential source of advantage, we've got a basis for building capacity to rapidly deliver, operate, and then sustain those sorts of capabilities. So I think they're probably 3 points just to offer in the time I've got here, and just to, I guess, stomp the floor on that point that this is something that we have that our strategic competitors don't have. So that's a source of advantage we really need to leverage.
Thank you very much. Colonel Guénette.
There's quite a few things. I mean, Canada's perspective is with True Allies. We recognize that how we're going to address these threats, SDA is absolutely fundamental. One of the first capabilities that we're going to be fielding is our surveillance of space 2. The ground segment is going to be in position by 2026, and then there's going to be a space segment after that. We're also working hard on what we call our Space Cop tool, which we're trying to build in machine learning and really ensure that it's compatible and works with our allies and partners system. Without a doubt, Canada is all in on Operation Olympic Defender. It's our main effort. We also leverage other forums, such as a CSPO, to make sure that collaborative approach and those discussions happen at the right level. Canada's doing its part to make sure that at least we take care of the Northern AO. We have about $21 billion committed now for the next 10 projects that are ongoing. We also believe that we need to find efficiencies on how we approach R&D, how we do special programs with the resource-limited context that we are in. We feel that there's probably sweet spots to find where we can really, either multilateral or bilateral perspective, make sure that we can really make our resource go the most way by focusing on certain key aspect. And so far we were having good success with that. And also AUKUS Pillar 2 is another vector. We're really happy that Canada's been invited to start the talks to see how we can meaningfully contribute to the Pillar 2.
Thank you very much. Major General Tedman.
Thanks again, Juliana. So first thing I'd say is it's really easy to beat ourselves up about a lack of collaboration. I'm passionate about this. I've been on this journey for about 4 years now, as General Whiting said earlier, both in US Space Command and I was commanding UK Space Command. And I've just seen enormous progress from when I first arrived in the command in US Space Command in Colorado to where we are today. So that's the first point that I'd like you to hoist on board, is that the journey has been incredible and we're doing really good work. But of course, there's always more work to do. I think CSPO has really forged a path. It's deciding where it goes next, because Olympic Defender has taken a different pathway. So for those that aren't aware, CSPO, I think, now is largely going to focus on policy, integration, capability, so the raise, sustain, train aspects that Greg spoke to, whereas Olympic Defender under General Whiting's leadership will focus far more on operations. And I think that's a good separation. It provides a really clear guidance to us as allies into where to put our resources and our equities going forward. If there's two things I would highlight in terms of what must we do going forward, the first thing I'd offer the community is, again, former simple soldier, is we need to try and normalize space a bit. We've been doing coalition allied operations for centuries, and for some reason we're finding it quite hard to put all that together in the space community and across all the space forces. But we've been doing this reasonably well in other domains for a really long time. My example of that would be Western Desert of Iraq in 2003. We had multiple countries that came together in a task force where we shared a plan from first principles. We all wrote the plan from the start, so it wasn't a plan that was retrospectively then briefed. It was a plan that we all contributed to. We shared intelligence, we shared targets, we had shared TTPs and SOPs, which meant that we could switch targets and we could interoperate in a way that we would wish to be able to do in space. So that use of a combined joint task force model to drive forward integration is a well-trodden path, and something that I think we are working on and considering how we do it going forward, but there's still work to do on that. So that would be my first point, a little bit about normalization of space to allow us to do the things that we've been doing in other domains for a long time. My second point would be about integration. So the integration across all elements, from planning into refinement and execution. My observation from the space community is we're pretty good at integrating in the execute functions because we centralize C2 in places like the CSPOCs. But integration from first principles into base plans and then into refinement seems to be more of a challenge. So I think if we can all get together and we're all contributing to a base plan that we then train to deliver, building the trust that General Whiting kindly quoted me on that I raised 3 weeks ago. If you train together, you build trust. And if you're training against a plan, then when you deploy into joint task forces like I mentioned in Iraq, then that trust is already built, you're already interoperable, and you already know what you're going to try and achieve through the plan.
Thank you very much. Major General Traut.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, let me express my personal gratitude, and I can represent my country in that respect as well, that we are invited to join Olympic Defender. It's a huge leap forward for us, together, of course, with France and New Zealand recently joined. And Olympic Defender is going to be really something which we are deepening and strengthening, not only our partnership, our trust, but at concrete operational matters. And this is really a really big challenge, of course, for us, first of all, and secondly, a huge opportunity to develop. And I think in Olympic Defender, we do have a clear team captain, because in the team sport, we need a team captain, and the team captain is, I think there's one commander of the multinational force. But secondly, and I'm again grateful that nobody else mentioned it so far, normalization of space. We discussed the role of NATO a little bit in the last days as well. And Sir Stuart yesterday mentioned we couldn't only learn from land, like Paul mentioned right now, we could learn from the development of the air domain as well. Yep. And perhaps we could learn and normalize a little bit from the development of NATO as well. I'm perfectly aware that not every country and not every nation organized in different multilateral organization is as well member of NATO. However, NATO has done some operations as well as a coalition, for instance, Afghanistan and elsewhere. And there are huge opportunities to join into a normalization of space as the 5th operational domain of NATO. And perhaps we could learn something of our more or less 75 years experience in NATO in integrating and setting standards, in using tactical data links, in employing combined or common C2 processes, in doing common training and building trust and confidence, and train as you fight. So that's one big point. And let me come back to one of the threats I personally feel. We need to convince our whole societies on the importance, and not only, there are some papers written in Germany, national security strategy last year, and our space industrial or space strategy, which was reissued last year as well after 12 years. They all realize and recognize that space is under threat. But these are governmental strategic documents, and we still struggle, first of all, to get it into our societies, and secondly, to be ready and willing to draw the consequences, i.e. investing more in space. And I see not only our military collaboration and our governmental collaboration being an important part, I see our collaboration with the academia, and not only the inner, I would say, in my simple words, the inner rocket science, but Juliana is a well-known representative of the strategic academia. These people are not suspected to have a particular own interest. They are scientists, they are academians, and I strongly underline that we need to collaborate and we need to tell that story to the broader academic circle to bring that message across that we need to do something about space. That's another thing or another aspect of partnership I would strongly underline over here. Thank you.
Certainly, thank you. Operation Olympic Defender has been mentioned quite a few times, and we are lucky that we have the team captain in the room. So the question to you, General Whiting, what is the future of Operation Olympic Defender?
Yeah, it's been an important grouping of countries now for 5+ years, and now we're at an inflection point where, as we've highlighted, we're growing. New Zealand has announced they're joining the group, and then France and Germany waiting to hear back from them formally, but expecting positive communications in the near future. But we think it really continues to allow us to bring together a team that highlights that we are committed to those norms of behavior that General Novak mentioned. All of our countries here on the stage, I think, have signed the Artemis Accords. Now, that's through our civil space agencies, but it's a way that, as nations, we've highlighted that we are going to operationalize our outer space treaty commitments. That's particularly important now that there's these reports that at least one country has plans to violate their outer space treaty commitments, and really change in expectation we've had for my entire life. I was born the same year the outer space treaty was signed, that countries don't put those weapons in space. And so OOD, as we come together, we commit to each other that we're going to operate by these norms of behavior that say things like, we're not going to create long-lived debris, we're not going to create harmful interference for others, we're going to communicate safety information, we're going to have due regard for others in space, we're going to have safe separation and safe trajectory with our space capabilities. When we all work together on that, it helps to highlight the bad behavior when we see others not operating in accordance with that. So that's one very important thing. As has been noted here, I think we all in OOD now are committed to further operationalizing that capability. That's looking at command and control structures. It's looking at what capabilities we contribute to OOD. It's how we jointly plan together. We are right now in the process of developing an OOD campaign plan that's being jointly worked on, and that will chart out lines of effort that we can work together to help set conditions in the domain, to help reduce risk, and to help us be postured if things in the domain happen that we don't want to happen. So excited by that as well. So I think the immediate future is growth and then operationalization.
Thank you very much. I do think we've talked a lot about the importance of geography, the importance of partnerships, and we've also talked about the importance of space surveillance and actually knowing what we're dealing with. So General Saez, if you don't mind, what is the importance of South America specifically to the space surveillance network?
Well, we are in a position in which everyone needs information, okay? Also, we have a very good communication system that could download and provide reliable information for the place in which today we don't have too many eyes that are watching the skies and the space. And probably the main challenger is to boost the local condition in the north. Is plenty of clear sky, so we can watch the sky every day. And in the south, we are in the position of every polar satellite will be. So have a very update and accurate information probably is one of the important roles that the South American continent could play. And that is the reason why we designed in case of Chile, the National Space Program, as a tool with a systemic vision, but also based on the bilateral and multilateral approach. So the collaboration in the space domain is a must. There are no chance to perform this process alone. And also it's a tool in the case of the defense for force development capabilities in order to have some kind of customization of those capacity according with our condition and our requirement as well. And particularly is a matter of related with the space sovereignty. And for the other side, and looking at a more systemic approach, is a matter of be able to achieve our national development. So the National Space Program today is a program that was born in the defense, but today is a national initiative. And consider the possibility to be very social-oriented program for the reason that we mentioned. So we must be able to provide the value of the space to the regular citizen. Sometimes it's so hard because we sell smoke and provide some tangible asset that really increase the quality of life. and the security of the people in the regular daily life probably is the main challenge that we're facing in our case. For the reason we consider the National Space Program as a kind of highway in which we are building with different streets. One is the facilities, the enabling facilities. For that reason, we already start the first National Space Center, one in the center focusing optical technology, one in the Patagonia, for the reason that you already mentioned, the geography, the Antarctic, the connection with Australia. And that will be focusing the radar technologies. And in the north, the third related with telecommunication. And in the center of the country related with nanotechnology and robotics. So that will allow to boost the national industry and really be able to develop our own capacity. Today, we already make a proposal for the development of our own national satellite communication system with the aim to be the owner of the channel and the data. So also the cyber issue is so important here. The possibility to collect data is the current goal of the first street in which we are in today in the phase of the implementation with a new national constellation of 10 satellites, and one will be very oriented to the space domain awareness in order to prove some concept, prove some technology, learn some technique and standard procedures, and prove some doctrine process. And finally, talent promotion is underway. We already changed the curriculum in the Academy of Air Force. Everyone to be part of the effort now become to be first aerospace engineer. And we are working very close together with the national universities and some international one. And for that reason also, under the umbrella of the international collaboration that you mentioned, and SICOFA, you know, SICOFA is a tool that we have among the North, Central, and South American Air Force. We provide lectures for space operations, for satellite communication, system to everyone in the region, in order to really achieve that the space matter for every country, for every people in the region. So you are totally right. This is a bilateral process, a multilateral approach, a very strategic one, in which we consider that be able to have a kind of social club in which everyone could apply, like a membership, and choose in what part of the value chain want to be or need to be, probably is the best approach of the international collaboration.
Thank you, General, and thank you to all the panelists for answering my questions. With that, I'm handing over to Professor Anu to conduct the audience Q&A.
Thank you very much, panelists, and thank you very much, Juliana. Going to have a slight change. We've got lots of questions on Slido, but we've also got some roving mics. We've got quite a bit of time, so I'm actually going to open up questions to the floor. In doing so, so first of all, I've got very bright lights here, so if people can help me if I see hands shooting up about where they're coming from. Secondly, please do remember, keep your context concise, and also just remember that this is a relatively open forum in terms of what you are asking and the degree of answers that can be put forwards, please. So if I open to the floor first, and I'm just seeing if I have one over there that I could see. If I could have a roving mic going over there, please. And I have another one here. And if you could just introduce yourself very briefly, name, organisation, title, etc.
Hi, thank you. Nick Merrick, Leonardo, campaign lead for air and space in the business. We've heard a fair bit about Operation Olympic Defender and that now being increasing inside to some 7 nations, I think it was. Do you expect this to evolve into more of a NATO-led operation? And if so, in due course, how would you think that would affect the pace of being able to react in a much larger organisation? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start on that and certainly welcome any additional comments. You know, as has been discussed, NATO has made some decisions over the last few years that space as an operational domain has not yet been defined as a warfighting domain. There's been a decision taken that NATO will not own its own space capabilities, that those will be contributed by member nations. They've also stood up a new, or relatively new NATO Space Ops Center. So I think we have to see how NATO decides to evolve its relationship with space going forward. Today, Olympic Defender is clearly a grouping of like-minded nations, some of which are NATO members, others are not, but are allies or Partnership for Peace groups. So today, that's how we'll remain until additional decisions may be made by NATO going forward.
I mean, I'd only add that the context of collaboration, continuing my theme of normalization, has always been bilateral, minilateral, multilateral. OOD is one organizational method to do it. There's bilateral ways to do it. NATO is another way. Jeff, there's all sorts of ways of collaborating across domains and across nations and allies to deliver effects for mutual benefit.
Thank you. I've got a second question just down here. So again, if the roving mic can come over, and then I will go third over there.
Hello, good morning. My name's Robert Fox. I've been a journalist for 57 years this month, and was involved in the late unpleasantness in the South Atlantic, where satellite communication came in a vital role. Juliana, this is for you as well as gentlemen. You've raised the obvious question, which is lack of space awareness in the general public. We've had two outstanding speeches. Thank you from General Whiting and from Rich last night. Cass. One of the clearest statements for the Strategic Defence Review where space sits. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I assure you, as being a leader of the Defence Commentators Circle, the Defence Correspondents Association, this message is not getting through. What do we all do about it?
I could start if you'd like, just to kill that awkward silence. Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I guess the first thing I'd say is that acknowledged, we have a defence-based strategy in Australia. It's got 5 lines of effort. Raising awareness in the community is one of the lines of effort we have. How do we do that? Well, again, this is one, noting that this is a recorded and broadcast, or we are talking about it, we are raising all of the issues that are on our minds in a public forum. And I think the fact that we've got a grouping like this, not just defence but policy, it's part of the narrative and part of the action they take forward. We heard yesterday with the warrant officers and sergeant majors that were up here talking about how we're getting the next generation of workforce ready. Engagement with schools, engagement with universities, sponsorship deals, and all those sorts of things. I think it's one of the great opportunities that faces us right now. So there's someone has mentioned in public speaking recently, and it's another space race. I heard someone talking about that the other day, and what I can see is that there is a level of interest in the wider community that is trending upwards. I have kids, teenagers, they watch SpaceX launches on YouTube. They watch the spacecraft be jettisoned as they're coming around in their orbits. And it's done in such a way that it engages that generation. And it is interesting, it is inspiring. And then we talk about moon missions, we talk about Mars missions in the foreseeable future. I think it's not an answer to the problem you've outlined, but I think it does demonstrate we're alert to it. And we are investing in it, and there's some of the ways in which we're doing so. I'll just offer that as a start point.
I'd be happy to come in as well. If
yeah, and then Juliana, if you can conduct around here so that we can get a number of perspectives, I think it's a really good point.
Okay. I think one of the problems that space has is that when it works, it's boring, right? So I think
I'm pretty excited, what?
Not at all.
I made myself very unpopular very quickly. But I think that's partly why the conversation on space hasn't started much sooner. Is because when there wasn't contestation, we were just getting SATCOM links and everything worked, and no one really worried about it because it was just working. So I think quite quickly, especially the press can be guilty of this, is that we do get caught between the extremes, where it's either sci-fi or it's logistics. And I think we just have to, actually get a nuanced, view of space out there. And I think, if I may add to the wish list for the SDR, and I'm sure there's no takers, I think it's the acknowledgement that space is absolutely vital for defence, and that it's not a luxury that we can afford once the conventional fighting force is set, but it's actually part of the baseline for defence. I don't know.
No, I'm sorry.
Paul and then Colonel Traut.
Yeah.
Robert, nice to see you. Thanks very much for your question. I appreciate it. I think we've touched on this a couple of times over the last day or so. My perspective would be defence is just one cog in the space enterprise of the UK and more wider. And therefore, taking a national security space approach across the enterprise would probably drive a conversation in a way that we haven't seen. We started with that a few years ago. The Prime Minister took a really strong influence and interest in space and drove that through his government. Being candid, I think that's waned a bit over the last few years. And there's a real opportunity now with this new government, as you heard from Avril, to really energise that debate again about the importance of space and put some proper national governance around it to bring together our efforts.
Colonel Traut.
Yeah, thank you. If I may, let me show my deepest respect for your business. You're having done that, having been doing that for 57 years. To my calculation, we live in the year 67 of space age right now. Okay. I was born in year 7 of space age, actually. And I would come back to one aspect over there. Besides involving the broader academia, not only the rocket scientists, bring that message across through academia, through universities, and teach students on the importance of space. And the second thing is, of course, go out and talk to any other audience rather than our space bubble over here. So that's a mission we all have, being members of that space bubble. Go out and speak about it. And the third thing which I would like to mention is actually to exercise locally. So there's so many exercises run in my country as well, disaster relief exercises, local fire brigades, and all those safety and security services. So bring in the dimension, bring in the space domain into those local exercises to the local firemen, and they will act as multipliers to our message. And last but not least, I think we could serve that wave of inspiration a little bit more, so that what you mentioned between science fiction and logistics. So space exploration was a great inspiration to all of us. So the first space race, manned space flight, and we look into that future. General Whiting mentioned that mankind is about to go back to the moon. And perhaps that's not only the exploration and the curiosity message, the science and technology message. We must combine the security and safety message with that inspiration, and then I think we will catch the young generation, which should be the main target audience of that.
General Saez, you also had a point.
I just want to mention that we are so aware about that you mentioned. For that reason, we declared the National Space Program Chile, first as a national initiative, second, as a very social-oriented program in which we want to create social and public value. For the reason we set the priority, the people, and the center and in front of every activity. And the way how we create value is by the development of technology and the creation of knowledge, but allow to us the creation of tools that provide solution to the problem of the people in the regular daily life. And also be able to incorporate the space as a key factor in the national equation of the national development by the creation of quality job, better salary, and the increase of quality of life and the security. So provide that message to the people in every activity. Doesn't matter if it's related with the defense, with the operation, from the kindergarten to the university. It's a challenge that we're facing every day in any activity, in any speed. So we have one specific public affairs program in a very collaborative approach with different ministers in order to be able to use the different channel of the government organization and the non-government organization as well, and provide that message to the regular citizen.
Thank you. Just to wrap up on this before we go to one question, if I can just add a personal perspective on this. So firstly, Robert, thank you very much. Michael, I'm glad you brought up the issue so clearly when you said that the lack of awareness is potentially, the way I put it, is a national security and resilience issue. But I want to tap into the optimism. So I've just come back from the G20 in Brazil, and I at the end, I gave a university lecture to students because of where we are from, not from Chile, but from Paraguay, from Argentina, and from Brazil. And that thirst of young university students who overwhelmingly were not space students, they were engineers, that thirst I could see there. But really, the urgency to get our strategic messaging through to the public, but also higher level to policymakers, to time what you were saying, Paul, is absolutely key going forward. So thank you very much for Robert for bringing up that challenge and opportunity space for us as well. We've still got a little bit more time. There was a lady whose hand's been up for a long time over there. So if the roving mic can come over there, please. We have about 8-9 minutes left, so I'm hoping to include a couple of more questions if I can.
Hello, Tara Brown, Space Systems Command International Affairs Office. I actually asked my question online, but I'll just read it out. Leveraging the panel question regarding international collaboration, what is the #1 thing each of you would like to see change or begin in the near term, so the next 1 to 5 years, pertaining to international partnership collaboration and integration?
Should we start this end? That's okay, sir?
Intel and info sharing. That's what we need to work on in order to keep that essay up, in order to keep that situational awareness up, in order to operate at the speed of relevance is really where we need to make some efforts.
In our case, talent promotion, because as we are in the foundation of the system, we need to have the people with the knowledge, with the skill to be part of the international system. Probably is the main challenge that we are facing now, and where now we are setting really the priorities.
Getting on a speed line of our horrible procurement process. Because, well, if you want to be a reasonable and contributing partner in international partnerships, you need to bring something to the table. That's the only way getting into a decent collaboration. Our ambition is to do that, but I have to fly with an elephant on my back, which is called procurement process. Thanks.
General Greg. We have so many forums and frameworks for cooperation and collaboration and engagement, and we focus on interoperable ICT platforms. We focus on command operations. I think raising the profile, I guess, of collaborative capability development and modernisation would be a step forward. So any framework we can leverage that will help us with technology transfer and understanding how we can better design our capability processes for load sharing across like-mindeds. I think that would be where I would like to see efforts put into answer that question.
Great question. I always like to try and start on the right-hand side of the page and work back. So I think you set a target of 5 years, which is sound given the rate of technological change. If we needed a forcing function, my view would be to get to combined architectures. That would drive all sorts of good behaviours if we could actually have a blue orbit from all of the nations represented here, that we all knew we could come together and operate. That would be a really good forcing function.
General Whiting?
Inside the U.S. system, Tara, as I noted in my remarks, we have a new policy that is fantastic, that really allows us the opportunity to lower the classification levels of some of our space-related systems. If a year from now we have failed to take advantage of that policy and had to do the work to actually do that, then bad on us, because this is not one of the times that policy is a limiting factor. Policy is good. We need to implement it, and then that's going to improve our ability to integrate and operate together.
Juliana, from the academic policy perspective?
Well, I'm an outsider and all the sandwiches have been eaten, but I do think it's the smoothing of processes, and I think also, as mentioned, the classification levels that I think for space can quite often be still quite severe.
Okay, thank you. Got time for a couple more questions. Sir, your hand has been up for quite a while as well.
and then I'll go to one over there and then possibly one over here as well. We have about 5 minutes left, so here, and possibly here.
Okay. Tim Robinson, Aerospace Magazine at Royal Aeronautical Society. Do the panel think the temptation for an adversary state to try and pull off a space Pearl Harbor has increased or decreased in recent years? Obviously, we're more dependent on space, we all know that, but at the same time, there's lots more satellites out there, lots more resilience in orbit. Thoughts?
Any takers initially?
Well, I'll just say I think it is our jobs here to make sure that that kind of surprise doesn't happen. And that's why space domain awareness is really job one for all of us, to know what's happening in the domain, but also through our collective international partnerships to demonstrate a collective resolve and will that we can be prepared for the kind of threats we're now seeing. And that's why in Olympic Defender, CISPO, and other bilateral, multilateral environments, we talk about these threats. We're planning for these threats to ensure we don't have a space Pearl Harbor.
I think it's an opportunity as well just to once again reiterate the importance of resilience in the space architecture, and not just nationally, but in a combined setting. If we present an architecture that doesn't have single points of failure and has depth and has redundancy and has alternate means, that might be enough to help us with our deterrence, and a cause for pause for any adversary that was thinking along those lines, that perhaps that's just not going to be as successful for them as might have hoped, so they don't do it. So I think resilience in the architecture is a fundamental aspect to how we might mitigate against that risk.
Yeah, and if I may add, systems analysis of the adversary's systems, broader systems, not only what's happening in space. We are in the advantageous position that in space it's harder to keep things secret than in other domains. But it's still possible to keep things secret, obviously. But everything in space depends on terrestrial, large and complex systems. So if we were able to analyze those systems thoroughly and in detail and in partnership, of course, and share that information, that would increase our resilience and would lower the risk of being surprised.
Okay. Any further answers?
Only normalization of the space is a key factor in the long term, because have some kind of normalization of the data in order to share good data and update data. Normalization of the kind of technology that we use, and probably also the procedure and some doctrine will be so important in order to be really able to collaborate and provide reliable data in order to avoid that kind of surprise, the space.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that very focused and challenging question. Probably got time for one more question. The lady's hand up was over here. So if we could have the roving mic coming over.
I'm Andrea Lackey. I work for Iris Technology. I represent small business in the U.S. that supply radiation-hardened electronics to companies such as Raytheon, Leonardo, Lockheed Martin, Northrop. And I like the collaboration between the governments and the allied nations. And I'm sure this isn't just restricted to the U.S., but how can small businesses like us in your individual nations support this collaborated global effort so we can leverage what we do for our nation to support these other nations? So at the top level, it seems like it's being done, but how can that scale down to the lower levels, such as our ITAR restrictions?
The SME challenge and opportunity space to contribute, General.
We define the enabling facility related with the space. For the reason, every national and regional space center that we're in the process of development have one specific place for the entrepreneurial activities. Talent promotion and entrepreneurial activities, the key factor in order to build the bridge between the industry and the academy. So we consider for the very beginning the incorporation of the startup and provide facilities, data, and the lab. For that reason also we are considered data center and high performance computer as a tool for that activities. So boost the space industry by provide a condition and promote the regional cluster of the industry is the answer for our side.
Okay, with 30 seconds left, are there any other perspectives on this, which is going to be addressed also, I think, in the next panel as well, but any final perspectives? Okay, in which case, thank you all very much for your questions. Thank you for panelists for sharing your perspectives. Juliana, thank you for organising this. Colleagues, could we give a congratulatory and appreciatory round of applause?